Here's the complete script. Think about the last time you genuinely helped someone. Not a favor traded for a favor. Actual help. The kind that cost you something real. Time you didn't have, money you couldn't easily spare, a reputation put on the line. You did it without calculation. You did it because you could, and they couldn't, and the math seemed simple enough. Now think about what came after. The gratitude was real, or seemed real. They called. The warmth in their voice was unmistakable. They told you what it had meant. And then something shifted, not all at once. Slowly, the warmth thinned. The calls got shorter. A distance opened that you noticed but couldn't put into words. Then you found out what they had been saying about you when you weren't in the room. Not nothing. Something that didn't fit the story you thought you were both living. If this is already landing, hit subscribe and tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from today. This is not a rare experience. Most people carry at least one version of it. A friend they carried through a hard season, a colleague they vouched for at real personal cost, a family member they gave money they didn't have. The relationship eventually went cold, or just quietly wrong. What was said afterward didn't sound like someone who had been helped. Friedrich Nietzsche was not a philosopher of warm feelings. He distrusted compassion, or more precisely, he distrusted the stories people tell themselves about their own compassion. In his 1878 work Human, All Too Human, he began arguing that pity, the German word is Mitleid, meaning literally suffering with, was not the noble virtue Schopenhauer had made it. It was a transaction, and like all transactions, it created obligations on both sides that most people preferred not to examine. The one who receives help does not simply receive warmth. They receive, at the same moment, a reminder of the distance between themselves and the person helping them. That distance does not disappear when the help is given. It stays. It sits in a relationship like something neither person has named. Later, in On the Genealogy of Morality, Nietzsche described the mechanism he called ressentiment. He chose a French word deliberately to distinguish it from ordinary frustration. Ressentiment is not anger. Anger moves outward, spins itself, and resolves. Ressentiment does the opposite. It accumulates. It turns inward, festers, and eventually reorganizes itself into a moral framework, a set of beliefs that allows the person who feels weak or indebted to reposition themselves as the injured party, the one who was actually wronged. When that framework takes hold, the person who helped you becomes, in their own mind, the source of the problem. Nietzsche was not being cynical for its own sake. He was mapping a mechanism he believed operated in most human beings, most of the time, at a level well below conscious thought. Understanding it doesn't make the betrayal hurt less, but it does clarify something most people spend years trying to work out alone. Here is what he found. The first reason, your help reminded them of their own powerlessness, and human beings rarely forgive that. Nietzsche observed that the will to power, the basic human drive towards self-expansion, mastery, and growth, is not reserved for the ambitious. It lives in everyone, including people who appear passive, including those working through genuine difficulty. When someone accepts help, they occupy a position of diminished power. They need something they cannot provide for themselves. And however kindly the help is given, the act registers in the deeper architecture of the psyche not just as relief, but as evidence of a gap. Think about the person who borrowed money from a close friend and never paid it back. The easy explanation is irresponsibility. Watch more closely, and something else often emerges. The person who cannot repay the debt begins, over time, to avoid the one they owe. That avoidance hardens. Eventually, they construct a story, sometimes shared with others, sometimes kept entirely internal, in which the lender becomes the problem. The loan gets reframed as given from a position of superiority, as offered with conditions that were never stated. The debt gets converted, through a slow psychological process, into a grievance against the person who gave it. This is not a flaw specific to bad people. It is a feature of the human psychology Nietzsche spent his career mapping. Power requires a counterweight. The person who is helped will, over time, find a way to restore their sense of balance. One of the most available ways is to decide that the helper was not, in fact, so admirable after all. The second reason, genuine gratitude requires a kind of inner strength most people have not yet developed. This sounds harsh. It is. Nietzsche was not interested in flattering people about their own capacities. Sustained gratitude requires something very specific. The ability to hold in your mind the fact of your own insufficiency without converting that fact into shame, and without converting that shame into hostility toward the person who witnessed it. It requires someone who is secure enough in their own worth that being helped does not feel like an exposure. Most people are not there. Not because they're small or ungrateful, but because shame is one of the most powerful and least acknowledged forces in human psychology. Being significantly helped activates it reliably. You did not help a person at their full strength. You helped them at a moment of need, which is also a moment of diminishment. They did not forget what they looked like to you in that moment. That memory has weight. The gratitude they felt at the time may have been completely real. But gratitude that requires ongoing acknowledgement of a debt is not something most people can sustain without it beginning to sour. The warmth becomes a reminder. The reminder becomes a discomfort. The discomfort, viewed from inside, starts to look like something you did to them. The third reason, the debt became unbearable, and the only available exit was to make you the one who wronged them. Nietzsche opens on the genealogy of morality with a sustained analysis of debt. He notes that the German word should carries a double meaning, referring to both financial obligation and to moral guilt. He considers that overlap significant. Human beings have always experienced unpaid obligation as a psychic weight. The creditor holds a claim. The debtor feels that claim pressing against them every time they encounter the person they owe. There's a psychology that develops specifically around debts that cannot be repaid. When the debt is financial, resolution is at least theoretically possible. But when the debt is of a different kind, when someone defended you publicly at real cost to themselves, or stood by you through something most people would have walked away from, the debt becomes categorically different. It cannot be settled. That impossibility creates its own sustained distress. The mind that cannot repay a debt will, under enough pressure, find a way to dissolve it. Not by paying it, by retroactively deciding it was not a legitimate debt, by locating an ulterior motive, a hidden condescension, a manipulation too subtle to recognize at the time. The narrative in which the helped person becomes the wrong party is not always consciously assembled. Often it builds over months or years, quietly, until the person believes it without a trace of doubt. If this video is giving you something to think about, subscribe and turn on notifications. It helps us keep making content like this. The fourth reason, pity, even unconscious pity, is registered as a wound. Nietzsche's critique of Mitleid went further than most people expect. He was not simply arguing that pity can feel condescending, though he believed it often does. He was making a structural observation. The act of pitying another person requires positioning yourself, at least implicitly, as the one who is not suffering. The person who receives that positioning, even when they ask for it, even when they needed it, registers it somewhere below language as a mark of inferiority. This has nothing to do with your intentions. You may have helped with an open hand, no judgment present, no sense of superiority anywhere in you. It does not matter. The recipient experiences the dynamic, not the intention behind it. What they feel is the gap. Gaps, over time, create pressure. There is a particular kind of helper you may recognize, someone who gives freely, attaches nothing to it, and expects nothing in return. That selflessness can be the most destabilizing kind of help to receive. It removes the transactional logic that would allow the recipient to feel equal. When there is no debt that can be repaid to restore the balance, the help exists as a permanent marker of the distance between you. The only available exit from that imbalance is to find something wrong with the person who created it. The fifth reason, Resseniment rewrote the entire history of the relationship, and they now believe the new version completely. This is the mechanism Nietzsche named most precisely, and it rewards careful attention. Resseniment is not a lie someone tells knowingly. It is a slow reorganization of meaning. The person who could not act, who needed help, who felt the weight of the gap, begins to reread the entire history of the relationship through a lens that restores their moral standing in it. Your generosity becomes evidence of arrogance. Your patience through their difficulty becomes a form of quiet control. The help itself, in this retelling, becomes the injury. The version of events that emerges from this process is internally coherent. It has its own logic. Evidence gets selected carefully and arranged toward a specific conclusion. The person who has arrived at this version of history does not experience themselves as constructing a narrative. They experience themselves as finally seeing clearly. This is what Nietzsche meant when he argued that many moral judgments are not grounded in truth, but in the psychological need to restore dignity to those who feel it has been stripped from them. The betrayal follows a pattern nearly every time. The person you helped needed eventually to become the person who was wronged by you, because that version of the story gave them back something the original version had taken away. The sixth reason, and the one that is hardest to hear, you may have helped in a way that made this outcome more likely than you recognized. This is not an assignment of blame. It is the only part of this knowledge with any practical use. Nietzsche wrote in Thus Spoke Zarathustra about what he called the gift-giving virtue, the capacity to give freely, not merely from surplus, but from a genuine overflowing of strength and life. He considered it among the highest qualities a human being could develop, but he distinguished it from another kind of giving from a need to be needed or as a strategy for securing something in a relationship that felt uncertain to you. The second kind of giving creates a different structure. When you give in order to be needed, you're not giving freely. You are constructing a dependency. The person on the receiving end often senses this, even without being able to name it. They feel, somewhere beneath the gratitude, that the help came with a hidden architecture, that their need was somehow useful to you, that the dynamic was not as clean as it appeared on the surface. This does not make the betrayal your fault. It means the kind of help you offer, and the place it comes from inside you, shapes the kind of relationship that follows. Help that flows from genuine overflow operates differently than help given from a need to matter to someone. Nietzsche would say the problem often begins long before the betrayal itself. It begins at the moment you decided to help and what that decision was actually about. Here's what most people want after hearing all of this: a correction, a cleaner method, a way to identify better people, give in a better way, and avoid the whole experience next time. Nietzsche does not offer that. What he offers is less comfortable and more durable. The capacity to be betrayed by those you help is not a design flaw you can engineer around. It is a feature of the territory you enter whenever you decide to help someone. You enter a human relationship with a power differential and obligations that resist being balanced. Those conditions do not disappear because your intentions were good. They are built into the structure of helping itself. What Nietzsche argues across his body of work is not that you should stop giving. He argues that giving from need will consistently produce these results. Not because people are ungrateful, though some are, because helping that originates in a need to be needed is built on an imbalance the other person will eventually feel pressed to address. The shift he points toward is quieter than a correction. It is the difference between giving as an act of genuine strength, where the giving costs you nothing essential, where no expectation is attached to the outcome, where the relationship does not hinge on whether the other person responds with the gratitude you hoped for, and giving is an act that binds you entirely to their response. The first kind of giving can survive what happens after. The second kind cannot. That kind of giving is rare. Most people cannot build it quickly or sustain it without effort, but it is the only kind that does not quietly construct, over time, the conditions for betrayal. What happened was not a surprise to the logic of what happened. It was a consequence. Consequences, once seen clearly, stop feeling like wounds. They start feeling like information about the structure of the situation and about yourself within it. That is not a comforting realization. It is an honest one. And for Nietzsche, honest was always worth more than comforting. There is a particular loneliness that follows this kind of betrayal. Not the loneliness of being alone. The loneliness of having believed you were seen and then discovering you were not. That should be allowed to be real, without rushing it toward a lesson or a new policy about who to trust. But at some point, something in what Nietzsche described becomes available. The person who betrayed you is not, in the final account, betraying you specifically. They were doing something more impersonal and more inevitable, being who they were at the level they had reached, under the pressure of a dynamic that had been building from the first moment you helped them. The betrayal was the exit they found. That does not make it hurt less. It makes it less personal. Less personal is, in the end, closer to free. Because the question you are left with is not a question about them. It is a question about the kind of giving you want to practice going forward. Whether it will come from a place that needs to be acknowledged to feel whole, or from somewhere that does not need that. Some people will always betray those who help them. That is not a verdict on you. It is a description of where they are. Nietzsche did not say stop giving. He said become someone who gives from a place that does not need the giving returned. That is harder to build than most things. It takes longer. It does not protect you from betrayal. Nothing does. What it gives you is more important than protection. The ability to look at what happened clearly without bitterness and understand it for what it was. Thank you for watching. More videos are on your screen now, and if you haven't already, subscribe. We'll see you in the next one.